First,
Thank you.
I want to welcome you officially to the Center of Muslim Experience. And for the sake of recording, we're also putting the date and time. Today is
November
6th.
Wednesday, November 6th.
November Wednesday 6th at around 11:15 a.m. And we are meeting with Mr. Meher.
Yes, ma'am.
What is your last name?
Arakat. A-R-E-K-A-T.
Meher Arakat with Jamil, Shohan, Chad Haynes, and Yasmin Saikia. So we are, as I said, delighted to have you here. Our work at the center, we are a research center.
Sure.
So we only study about and document about the diversity of Muslims in America. That is our initial work, is to find out the diversity when people came, when people settled down here, and their experiences and contributions to this country as a diversity of Muslims.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
So we do know that Muslims have come in different times, and some stories are better known and some are lesser known. And one of the stories that is probably less known is a long history of Palestinian migration to this country.
Yes, ma'am.
And so, since I think you are originally from that part of the
Yes.
world, we would really appreciate anything you can share with us.
Sure. Yes.
About this community. But before that, if anybody has anything else to say, we can go around
Did
doing
we
that.
just introduce ourselves?
I'm Yasmin Saikia.
And she's a professor.
I'm a
of history.
professor of history, and I hold what they call an endowed chair in peace studies, and I'm also honored or helping to co-direct the Center of Muslim Experience.
Nice to meet you.
Nice. And I'm Chad Haynes. I'm an associate professor of religious studies, even though I'm actually a cultural anthropologist. So I always have to qualify, because when people say religious studies, they think theology and texts and things.
Sure.
But I study sort of people and cultures, and so Muslim cultures around the world.
Awesome.
Mostly in South Asia. So, but I lived in Cairo for a number of years.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
I was at the American University in Cairo. So that's my little introduction to the Middle East region, at least.
And you kept in touch, obviously, huh?
Yes. So, and just so you know, Yasmin and I are also married.
Oh,
So-
nice.
So,
Make a good team.
yes.
Work together.
So
You're married.
we co-direct the center and
Fantastic.
yes, so together.
And we got
And
brother.
Jamil.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fishbowl in the other office.
Yes. Okay. So maybe just to start a little about your own self and story, and we can.
It's been a long life, long journey. I'm a Palestinian American, Muslim, obviously, born and raised in the old city. Had to leave in 1967 when the war broke out. Family got uprooted. We had to leave under the direction of a tank. 5 minutes to leave and start walking toward Jordan or lose your life.
But which part of Palestine are you from?
Jerusalem. Al-Quds.
Jerusalem.
Yes.
Okay.
The
Al-Quds.
old cities.
Old city, East
Yes.
Jerusalem.
So we had to, from Jerusalem to the Jordan River is approximately 30 kilometers, 20 miles. So we had to walk it. Hundreds of thousands of people just ran for their life. And right now I'm reliving the nightmare with our brothers and sisters in Gaza. It's the same scenario, But back then we flew, but right now it looks like they're staying, and that's a good thing to have. So I became a refugee in Jordan approximately 2.5 years, from June until November. So I spent the 2.5 years like in a refugee camp in Jordan. I had family there too, one of the lucky ones, So also one of the lucky ones to migrate out of Jordan and to make a new life, to come here. My father and my uncles worked for the UN and UNRWA. You know who UNRWA is? United Nations Relief Agency.
Yes.
That was started in 1948 when they to feed the refugee camps in the West Bank and Gaza. So my father at the time used to travel back and forth to the UN, and at the same time they had given him because he did a lot of business here, he was able to become a citizen. But at the time the war broke out, he was here, we were back. We migrated to Jordan, obviously, and he didn't know if we were dead or alive. And back then, a letter used to take about 30 days to go across. But with the luck of the UN, the message went to Europe, from Europe to the different United Nations offices. Somehow it got to him that we're still alive 2 weeks later.
How old were you at the time?
12 years old.
12 years old.
I was born in 55, and we had to run in 67. Yeah. So yeah.
So it was 67 war that displaced.
Displaced my family and I, and obviously hundreds of thousands of people, 67, you have Palestinian people who went up north to Lebanon and Syria. Ourselves in the West Bank headed east toward Jordan, and...
But then you were very fortunate to have come to the U.S. Many people got stuck in Jordan.
Exactly. I still have family in refugee camps in Jordan, actually, till now, from 67.
In the
still
Jabalia
camps.
camp, Zatari camp, or
That's new.
There's a Wahdat camp, it's called.
Wahdat camp.
Wahdat, yeah. This is the Wahdat is one of the biggest refugee camps in Jordan.
Okay, so from 67 to now.
To now, yes. 67, then at the end of 70, I landed at in the U.S. in 1970, November 2nd, 1970.
You remember that?
Yes, yes, yeah. Yeah, it took us like 3 days to get here. We had to go spend the night in Beirut, and from Beirut to Italy, from Italy to London, London to Chicago, Chicago to San Francisco.
Wow.
Those days, flights were like very...
Yeah.
So
Step by
your
step.
father was already here?
My father, my oldest uncle worked with the UN as well. My oldest uncle came here in 53, and what happened, he resigned from the UN and started his own business in California.
Okay.
And then when the war broke out, my father was still with the UN. So when he decided to bring us here, he saw no future for him to go back because we're here. Mom and the kids are here. So he decided to stay here and make America home. So he was able to work with my uncle in California, running a business.
What part of California?
San Jose.
San Jose?
San Jose, California, Northern California. Yeah, so we landed actually in San Francisco. And then my father and my uncle they had a branch business here in Arizona. Arizona was nothing like the Phoenix area. So they were going back and forth between the two states, especially like in the winter time they would come here, summertime they would go to California because of the weather.
Yeah, much better.
Yeah. So then since Arizona was a nice place, was quiet, was small, my father decided to raise us here. So we settled in Phoenix.
So 2 questions about the
Yes, ma'am.
business. What kind of business was it?
They were in the dry good business.
Dry good business.
Dry good business, yeah.
So like things like this?
No, dry goods, which is
dry
clothing.
goods. Oh, clothing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, clothing, yeah. And they were in the food business too, as well, with others,
And so they started the business here in Phoenix, where they one of the
They
first...
started in California, actually.
No, that was your uncle.
Yeah, but my father worked with him,
Right.
and they were doing business in this state and that state, back and forth.
But here in Phoenix or in Arizona, was
Arizona.
it your father who started it?
My father started the branch here, yes.
Branch here.
Yes.
At the time when he started the branch here in Arizona, were there already some Palestinians here?
Not really. There was us, and there was another friend of ours, friend of my dad. He was a dinosaur, like my dad was too. He was from Hebron, city of Hebron.
Oh.
So basically, my father and this other gentleman, they were the only Palestinians. But a few years later, we had more come in.
Right.
As time went on.
So this would have been like 72, 73?
Yes, early 70s, 70, 71, 2, 3,
Right.
Yeah, all the way, yeah.
Right.
And so the new people started coming in.
New people start coming
But
in.
they
yes.
came here because they knew that there was opportunity for work, business, or because they thought they didn't know much about Arizona and just ended up here as refugees because the government put them here.
They were refugees / also there were other Palestinians who have also migrated in 1948 who got kicked out.
Right.
The fortunate ones that came to America and they kept coming west, you know. So and they ended up here. So we were few families back then, and word of mouth, you meet somebody, I meet somebody, and we start gathering. We had my father was always a people's person, We all are, and so we'll meet all these different Palestinians or different Arabs or Muslims from different nationalities, different countries, and we had he had his own club to where everybody would come to his house once a month at least to kind of kick back and talk and get news on what's going on, what can we do, how can we do it, how's everybody's doing, blah blah blah, the whole 9 yards. So we started our own little community, Arab / Palestinians / Muslims,
Right.
So that was a kind of get together.
A get together. My father made sure that we were at least together once a month, and sometime a weekly basis. My father's house, they called it back then Denny's. Like a Denny's restaurant, always open.
Right.
Because back then,
Where did you live?
We lived in. When we first came here, we lived in Middle Phoenix. Because when we came here, Van Buren was the street. This is it. Van Buren was the best hotels, motels, best restaurants, gas stations. I mean, wintertime, it's like this. It's like we used to call it the strip of Vegas, the mini strip. And the cities start going north and east, and start growing. So we lived in the middle of Phoenix. We rented a house until my father was able to make a few more dollars to buy one, and then we moved to the Northwest Valley. I-17, like Greenway Road,
Okay, right, okay.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, when you lived in Central Phoenix or Middle Phoenix, did you at that time, besides the Arabs and the Palestinian community, did you know about other Muslim communities in that area, living in that area?
There wasn't many. I think in the 70s there wasn't that many. In the 80s we started getting Pakistani communities, Afghanis, Muslims from other countries start coming in, because everybody heard about Arizona, how the standard of living is low. I mean, it's not expensive. I mean, I worked at a gas station one time. I remember selling unleaded when it came out, 19 cents a gallon.
Big memories of those days.
Yes. My father used to take us back then, and instead of Safeway and Fry's, Lucky's Market. $40. The whole family ate groceries, $40 worth.
Yeah, now it's $400.
Yeah. Brand new car, $2,000-3,000, back then.
McDonald's was 10 cents.
But we have been doing some research on Muslims in this area, in Arizona before, and there was a very interesting group of what today would be Pakistanis and Indian Muslims who used to live in Central Phoenix.
The West Valley.
The
West Side.
West Side. And they had been here from the 1920s and 1930s. They had a very important role in citizenship amendment acts in America. Had you at all heard about this group of people? They were like farmers.
Farmers in the West Side, a lot of cotton. They used to
They did cotton, they did alfalfa, and then they did spinach and melon.
Right. Yes,
Those
melon and watermelon.
Watermelon.
Yes, and the Northwest Valley used to be nothing but citrus groves. Yes, my father was involved with them, with those groups. But it's been so long, and I know they used to frequent his house and he used to frequent their homes and stuff like that, and they would have meetings. Yes, they contributed a lot to the West Valley, because the West Valley was nothing but farmland.
Right.
There still is a lot of farmland over there.
It's still, but right now it's growing.
Now it has started building up.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, there used to be the biggest egg farm there,
Really?
Heckman's. and they had to, you know, pack and leave because the stadium took their place. They sold to the stadium.
Wow.
And I remember the west side, like I said, a lot of cotton, a lot of vegetables.
Because I'm trying to trace the families of those farmers who had lived around here. I found a couple of them, but not all of them. And it is very difficult because they're no longer Muslims.
Yes.
They have married locally.
Intermarried,
Yes.
interfaith, you know.
Yes, exactly. So
yes. Some of us stayed close-knit, and some of us, you
so
know.
is that the same story with the Palestinian community who settled here early?
More so, we stayed who we are. Some of us married American women. In my case, I am married to an American woman, you know.
Right. But you remained a Muslim?
Yes, ma'am.
Ah,
Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
Okay. And your wife, may I ask? And your
My wife, she's Christian.
Okay.
She's still a Christian. I never asked her to convert.
Right.
Uh,
And then your children?
My children, they're both Muslims. One of them, the oldest one, married a Muslim man. The other one married. His background is Armenian / Ashurian from Iraq.
Iraq.
But you know, we have to be open-minded. You know, we all are from the Abrahamic belief. You know,
Yes.
Christians, Jews, or Muslims. You know, so for me and my family, it wasn't that big of a deal, to be honest with you.
I think we all need to be more open-minded.
Yes, yes. We all need to get along. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
You know.
But one of the interesting things with this community they're originally from British India, Pakistan, that we found their cemetery on I-17 and I-10.
Van Buren, I think.
Yes,
Van Buren,
basically.
In Greenwood
Yes,
Cemetery.
in Greenwood.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was the first cemetery in the state, actually.
So how about your father? Is he buried here?
We buried him here. He passed in 2006 at the age of 81.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. Actually, we built the Al-Rahma cemetery.
Okay. Right.
But, you know, it's too far for us and my mom to go to. So what we did, we verbally contracted with Green Acres down
Yeah,
here.
Green Acres, yeah.
And what they did is they made, it's not like we're special people.
Right.
They gave us a special corner, says
We have
Muslims.
been there. We have been
visited
there.
there.
Yeah.
recently.
We've visited.
And obviously in Maricopa County, you cannot lay a body on the ground because
Right. It has to go in a coffin.
and it has to go, we requested cardboard box,
Okay.
not a casket.
Bigger casket.
You know, so we buried him. We buried him over there. You know,
Green Acres. So your mother is still alive.
my mother's still alive. She's 91. We take care of her.
And where are your parents originally from? Are they also from Jerusalem or other parts of the West Bank?
We're from Jerusalem.
All of you.
Our family goes back. The Arikat family goes back to almost 400 years in Jerusalem. At one time in the late 1800, they used to, you know how us Muslims would go to Mecca for pilgrimage. The Christians from Europe, they used to come to Jerusalem for their pilgrims. So my family, they used to call them the 10 riders. Back then, horses, you know. They used to protect those Christian pilgrims that come from Europe to do their duty, and they'll house them, they'll feed them, protect them from, you know, bad people, you know.
Robbers and this.
Yeah,
and
you
that.
know how it
Usually
is. You always have the bad people, you know.
So it's interesting in Jerusalem, all these intermixes of the ways in which Dusabeh has the key to the Holy Sepulchre.
Holy Sepulchre is with there's friends of ours. Their family, they still have all the keys.
Nusabeh. Yes, Nusabeh.
Yeah, Nusabeh.
Nusabeh.
Because back then,
We know
the
that.
Christians, you know, they were fighting among themselves, and then us Muslims, we stepped in. We said, "You go there, you go there, you go there. I have the key from now on. I'm going to open up for you." So then Nusabeh family, they still have that key to the church.
Yeah. So whole Sepulchre. So and another question about life here in Phoenix.
Sure.
So you said that your father's house was like an open place where people came and went. But you also mentioned that it was Arabs, Palestinians, and Muslims.
Muslims in general. Yes.
So who were the Muslims here that you met?
You know, we start seeing like Indians, Muslim, Pakistanis, Afghanis, obviously Muslims from the Middle East.
What about like Northeast Africa?
Northeast, you'll have some people from Morocco, Egypt, and we even had Sudani family that came in years ago. So it was just intermix of different Muslims from different countries, you know.
So
There were
how-
Muslim Americans too.
Yeah.
You know.
So how many of these are Palestinians? Do you know? Like your father died in 2006, which is just recent.
Recent, yes.
Yes. But from 1971, 72, you have been here. Your parents
Yes.
have been here,
Yes.
right? Because you said in 1970 you came to the U.S. And so you probably slowly moved this way around 74, 75 to Arizona.
No, Arizona, we moved right away. We actually, when we came here, we lived, out of 53 years here, myself, 2 years were in California. We lived in San Francisco for approximately 20 months because we had family there, and my oldest uncle was there. And then my father loved Arizona so much, he said, no, I'm going to take my business, I'm going to take the family, and move to Arizona, bye family, you know. So we said goodbye to the rest of the family, we moved here. I still have my oldest sister, she lives there, but
In
she got
California.
married and moved there, actually.
Right.
Yes. But yeah,
So you've been here 53 years.
53 years in America, 51 here.
51 in the U.S.
Yes, yeah.
So 51 in Arizona.
Arizona, I'm sorry.
So in this 51 years of being in Arizona, can you tell us what some of the patterns that you have seen among the Muslim community? In any way, means not just the demographics, but just patterns that strike you.
Like maybe what jobs they have.
Yeah.
No, something more. Let him
More,
just give me
yeah.
patterns. What comes to your mind?
You know, back then, you know, as Muslims, I think we were more reserved. Not my father and us, because we were always outgoing. But you meet other Muslims, they kind of... My father always encouraged Muslims and Arabs and other Palestinians just to have a sense of belonging. You're in America, you're an American citizen. You know, be proud of who you are. You know, tell people you're a Muslim, you're a Pakistani, you're from Egypt, you're from Palestine. Because a lot of people were holding back. But at the time, Arizona wasn't that bad. You know, we didn't have a lot of racism toward other religion, toward us. We experienced that later, actually. 70s and 80s, it was nice. People were very receptive to have others. Because, you know, that the Latinos were here, the Mexicans, as workers.
Right.
And they were blacks, but not that many. And the blacks were mainly in the south Phoenix. Because I remember when I went to school here, you had some racist white boys. And, you know, we got to know each other, and they say, "Oh, don't go to that side. Problems." I said, "Why?" They said, "Black," because I didn't speak the language, you know. So they were. You could feel it, you know, that there were some racist people, and Arizona became also, you know, as you all know, it became a mecca for retired people. You know, especially Apache Junction, Mesa, Sun Cities, Youngtown, Sun Cities, all those Sun Cities. Back then were just Youngtown, and then Sun City
developed.
and then Sun City West, and Sun City 2, 3, or 4, 5, you know.
Pretty
And
soon
then-
be part of Palm Springs.
Exactly. So that's when the problem started, because to me, they were all pure white, rich white people that moved here. For the most part, they were all right-wingers, you know, not middle of the road. And that's why, actually, in the 70s and 80s, those people made Arizona red state, actually.
Oh, really?
Because they're the ones who used to vote all the time. The youngs didn't, you know. And a lot of them were from the era of the World War II era. They were proud. They went and killed in Europe, and they got injured, and they joined the service, and this and that and the other. So they were like the mini MAGA, I call them right now. Back then,
Yes.
that's when we started.
Yes.
That's when we start seeing a little bit here and there, because, you know, our color, you know, obviously, you know.
Was there any anti-Arab or anti-Muslim sentiments that you or others experienced or talked about? Or?
It became later, to be honest with you. It became later when
Like after 9/11 or like?
No, it became after actually the Iranian Revolution.
Okay.
Because
Just wondering.
they start calling me, "You so-and-so Iranian." Okay, I'm not an Iranian, you know. But back then they were mad at the Iranians.
Right. Yeah.
And they'll be mad at the Mexican. You so and so Mexican, go back, you know, take your tacos and go back to Mexico, you know. And then, you know, obviously the PLO, we started the PLO, and then people know that we're Palestinians. Oh, you're so and so. They didn't call us a terrorist. You so and so Palestinians, you're killers, you're this, you're the other, you know.
Because the 1970s are a lot of the kidnappings. And
Exactly,
hijackings.
hijackings.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you know we had to resist, and I mean resisting all means. You know, you throw stones, you pick up a knife, you pick up a gun, you hijack a plane. You know.
So what kind of community did you have here?
As what, Muslim Arab communities?
As Muslim. Okay, you keep using the word Arab. Is that how you see Muslims? Only as
No,
Arab
no, no.
Muslims?
I see, you know, because I grew up back in Palestine. We had, believe it or not, we had Pakistani Muslims in Palestine.
Yeah.
We had Iranian Muslims in Pakistan. We had Turkish, Turks, and Arabs. Obviously, we are Arabs. But you know, when I talk about Muslims in general, because I do respect Muslims from all Islamic countries, you know, and also going to Jordan, there was a lot of different Muslims from different Muslim countries, not just Arab countries.
Right. So I want to ask you, when you're saying there's a slight rise of racism by the 80s after Iranian Revolution, and
Yes.
by the 90s, it's really
90s
becoming
when-
quite evident, right? What was the relationship of the Muslims in feeling that there is a community? Was there a community feeling among Muslims?
Beyond just the ethnic,
Beyond the
national backgrounds.
You know, that's when my dad started sitting down and having a conversation with everybody. You know, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? How are we going to make a stance as Muslims? Just like I told Jamil, you know, my father and some of our family and friends, we started the mosque here. The first mosque celebrated 40 years.
ICC?
ICC, yes.
1984?
84, yes,
84.
40 years, yeah. My father pushed for it because, you know, people were praying at home.
So that's what happened before. Most people just prayed at home. They didn't really congregate.
That's what I was going to ask. Was there any place on Friday that people got together at either somebody's
My
home?
father would bring people to our house to perform Jum'ah prayers. You know, or we'd go to a park, you know, like South Mountain Park. We would gather there.
Okay.
You know, we did a lot of, when the weather was nice, because sometimes your homes are small.
Right.
You know, either in the backyard or inside the house, because the community got bigger and bigger, you know. So that's when the idea came to, you know, start a mosque.
Mosque. So where did the money come from?
The money came from all of us families, poor families. You know, we didn't have that means, but back then the land was cheap. You know, and the reason we came here to do it, because of ASU, and back then, especially Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, mainly Saudi Arabia, they used to send their kids here for education. You know, and ASU, I mean, it's always been top notch.
Was that one of the driving reasons for having it here in Tempe?
100%.
Because we were talking about that, about how to, So
we were able to raise a few dollars to buy the land, but we didn't have money to do the building. And I wish we had the money. We could have bought more land.
But there were other opportunities later on to acquire good properties.
Exactly.
And the community did not.
Yeah, we're all working people, just like, you know.
No, they had the money.
Yeah.
It is bad decision.
Recently, just like 15, 20 years ago, to buy that church.
Church, we screwed up, yes.
Yes.
They did. And
Badly
my father
screwed
was
up.
always an advocate. He said, let's buy property around, even if we don't use it now.
No, in future. And then there was a parking lot that the city had given to the mosque.
Yes.
The mosque did not take it.
Yes.
Yeah.
There were a lot of bad decisions.
A lot of very
You know,
bad
they didn't
decisions.
think outside the box.
No.
Wow.
And they didn't think to the future. And my father always said, look ahead, you guys, come on, you know.
So that's the
we're
reason I
gonna
keep
grow.
getting parking tickets.
Yeah.
So when you came to, when those 4 families, were they all Palestinian or were they mixed?
Mainly Palestinian in the beginning, and then we started getting other Arab. We had a nice Iraqi family here.
But how about the Tang family?
He was
The
the
Tang
architect.
family. the Chinese Muslim family, the business family.
The
Tang. Yes. We worked with them. We rolled with them. Some of them, they were Christians, or they became Christians, actually, the Tangs.
Okay.
You know, they're one of the originals. Actually, they were here before us.
Right.
You know, like you
Yes.
said, 1920s, 30s, and
30s,
whatever, you know. But if you go back, you know, there's a statue for Al-Hajj Ali.
Yes.
Okay, you know his story,
Yeah,
right?
we know his story.
Yeah, you know, he came here. They brought him here to establish the railroad.
But since after the Haji Ali story, I think the other group that we have, two other groups that we have identified, which is 20th century, early 20th century, is the Bosnian Muslims.
First,
Who were in
but to
Globe.
Globe and
Those people
Miners.
we didn't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
We didn't know.
Who were miners.
But they
Right.
came around when we opened the mosque. A lot of these, when they heard there's a mosque in Phoenix, they will drive. They make the drive from Tucson, from Flag, if we
Flag,
had Muslims
yeah.
there, from Globe, from Miami,
Yeah.
from all over. They would come to the mosque. They will make a trip.
And then we know
Because
of this Indian Muslim Pakistani community, the
1920s.
farmers
Yes.
of the
because
1920s.
the Bosnians were all miners.
Miners,
Miners.
tough people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just like the Irish, you
Yes.
know. Yes. Yeah, tough
So-
people.
Interesting.
For us, Palestinians were mainly a lot of us
Business.
business people. Yeah.
So that's another thing
Yeah.
we need to know. We have also, excuse me, heard that there were Palestinians here who had businesses that do not comply to Sharia laws.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Could
That
we
was
hear
very
a little?
diplomatic.
Could we hear a little more about it?
You know, let me talk to you about alcohol, right?
Yes.
You go to the gas station, there's alcohol. You go to Denny's, there's beer and wine. You go to Safeway or Fry's, there's liquor. So, you know, some of my family got in the food business to where you have to sell
Alcohol.
You know, and then you talk to the imam, you read the books and this and that and the other, you know. Some of us complied 100%, not touching it, having somebody else do the alcohol part of it. Some of us did, you know. Some of us justified it being business. Like if we were back in a Muslim country, we would not drink alcohol, be near alcohol, we would not handle alcohol, you know, blah, blah, blah. So it was a dilemma, you know. Some of us had butcher shops to where we have to serve khanzir, pork, you know, pig. You know? So these were the things that our communities were facing because we lived in a non-Muslim country.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you're doing business.
Exactly.
So you have to
Exactly.
serve everybody.
Exactly.
So the dilemma was at the level of, you know, back home we would not do this,
Yes.
here we are doing it kind of. But then when you earn the money, right, you earn the money.
Yes,
You had some level of profit and you had to pay zakat.
right.
So how did you do that? I mean, how did you make such money into halal money for zakat?
Right. You know, let me give you an example. I owned a property 30-some years ago, and one of my brothers partnered up with a cousin, and they opened a mini market, just like a Circle K, but they're all private. But we had beer and wine there. So I wanted to send my mom for the Hajj. My father was ill. So what I did is I took the money from the building to make sure I dedicated that money for her Hajj instead of the money that the family earned from the beer and wine store. And then I talked to the imam. He said, perfect. He said, you're doing a good job. I said, my mom's going to go perform the Hajj. And he knew that we had the market, my brother and my cousins, and he knew that we had, they were selling beer and wine because people wanted that, you know. And I said, Imam, this is what I did. I saved money from the earning of rent.
Rent versus the
Versus,
selling of the
exactly.
Good.
So that's how we were able to justify it and separate it.
Separate funds.
Okay,
You
so
know.
these are interesting ways of actually being realistic. I'm trying to understand
Exactly.
how Muslim communities
Sort of
have,
operated.
You know, we had to walk a fine line. We had somehow to live and be part of the society and not to be outish, you know.
Yeah.
You know, obviously we go places, we say, please, you know, to the waiter, no pork,
Yeah.
you know, no alcohol. If there's a drinks that has alcohol, we say no alcohol. If there's anybody pork pie product, please. We don't, until now, when we go to a restaurant, this is the first thing I say, or my family, or my wife, or my kids. That's the first thing we ask about. So that was
So
the
you
example.
maintain it at a private level?
Yes, ma'am.
But
Yeah.
at a business level, you sort of have to...
Some of us had no choice but to do it,
Do it.
and to kind of serve alcohol or sell alcohol, or maybe have a restaurant to where you sell
Serving
pork
pork,
dishes.
right, yeah.
Some of us were in the deli business, where we have to serve ham and cheese sandwich.
Right.
So
So how many Palestinians are there, do you know, in the valley?
We still not that many. From one town, friends of mine, there's at least 500.
Which town? Which place?
It's called Deir Dibwan, which is north of Ramallah.
Oh, okay, they're the
They're the biggest community here.
Oh, okay.
For me, my family and us, I think we're close to 100. Because my uncle came, and then we had cousins, and everybody got married and had kids, blah blah blah, what have you. So yeah, our family got bigger, and obviously we had a huge family that stayed in California. Some of them migrated here. Some of them came here for retirement.
So your own family is around 100 members now?
Here in Phoenix, close to, close to 100, between the cousins and the uncles and the kids and everybody else.
And then the Deir Dibwan that you said, that's around 200-300 people here?
That's more than that, actually.
Okay, or 500.
Last night, actually, I was at one of their weddings, We had 500 people in the room.
Oh, that's how you came up with this calculation of 500.
They're good friends of mine,
Okay.
and they all own their own businesses. So and some of them, they can't afford to do a wedding party on Friday or Saturday night. So they'll do it middle of the week because they get a break.
It's cheaper.
It's cheaper.
Weekdays.
So when
and
you say
weekends.
they're in business, what kind of businesses do they do?
Different business, tobacco business, food business, gas station business. You name it, across the board. Some of them are workers, obviously. Some are, some are professionals. In my family, I had doctors, I had engineers, we have business people, we had people that work for others. But for us immigrants, unless
I'm an immigrant.
unless like you guys, you earned a nice degree and you are professors. To make a good living in America, you have to go in business.
Yes. Even
I
professors.
myself went to school for 4 years. I never graduated because I found a niche in doing business. But I educated my daughters because right now different times.
Yeah.
Back then it was easy for us to get in business, and obviously you get in business, you work it twice as hard because it's on you to make it or break it.
Right.
And 7 days a week.
Right.
24 hours a day, you're involved. It's not easy. But to make a good living in America, you have to work for yourself. That was my idea, and my father's and everybody else that came back then. Because to live the life we want to live and to be comfortable, But if you work for others, they barely give you enough to eat and drink or what have you. You have to end up going on the welfare line too.
But going back a little, actually, two sort of separate questions. The first question, I guess I just asked, when you first started the mosque, how did you find an imam? And what was the process of salary and how did that work?
It was all was volunteers.
Okay, that's what it is.
We did it like back home.
Yeah.
Volunteers.
Right.
And obviously some of us are more into the religion. Myself, I am Muslim, alhamdulillah, but I don't know much. So some of the community, they were studying,
Right.
they had the know-how. So we dedicated them, we pushed them to lead. You always, like if you're
Like back home, as you said, somebody, whoever is.
So do you remember when the first imam then was hired? Independent imam? Professional imam, if you will.
Imam Shakri was the first one.
Yeah.
Oh,
Probably we had We had a person, a businessman slash imam, because he knew so much about. He studied the Deen, he studied the Quran, and he was one of the ones that my father sent to Saudi Arabia to collect money from the government to do the mosque. So we dedicated him actually to be the first imam. Yeah.
So how much money did Saudi Arabia give you at that time?
I've lost count, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Initially, they gave us some, and they kept sending, because we started the building. Obviously, we did the mosque first, and then we
To the extent
did
the Phoenician restaurant.
finished the restaurant on that side. Yeah. And I wish we had, we collected enough. We could have bought more property, but it didn't work out.
So he went out there. He told them this Arizona community, but the Saudis had an interest in the valley because they had come here several times for treatment in the 1950s.
I don't know about that. To be honest
The
with
prince
you.
had come.
Yeah.
And he had also given these date palms that we now have in Dateland.
Dateland, yes.
Given by him.
Yes.
And I have a lot of records of
Yes.
his visit, couple of times.
That was before us.
Yes,
That
in the
was
50s.
Before us.
So
yes.
when I'm trying, maybe perhaps when your imam went to meet him and said, we are doing this in Phoenix, it resonated because they had come here and had got treatment.
When we lobbied the Saudi government, we concentrated on students.
Okay.
We said, listen, your students are lost.
Uh-huh.
You don't want them to veer away from Islam. If we have that property in the middle of ASU, your kids come here. Can you
So
help
from
us?
the beginning it was thought as serving the students of ASU.
Students slash us.
Us, yeah.
Because anywhere in the back then there was no traffic, no roads, nothing. I mean, you could come to downtown Tempe from anywhere in the valley within 20 minutes. It wasn't a big drive for us, not like right now.
But this made reason for them to invest in this mosque.
Exactly, and besides,
Because it will serve their people.
Yeah, besides, where am I going to get money from Jordan or us
Jordan.
Palestinians? We don't have it, And back then, the oil money.
Oil money,
Yes.
You can see that.
That's why we lobbied them, and them in particular. And we said, listen, we dwelled on the students. We said, listen, we're Muslims. We're paying at home.
Right.
Your kids, they're going out, they're doing this, they're doing that, But if we put a mosque there, it's going to stay in their head.
Right.
You're going to keep your kids on the straight line.
Right.
That was our
Your selling point.
the selling point exactly
Now,
to the
ASU
government.
still uses the mosque to attract Saudi students.
And
Exactly.
Gulf students.
And Gulf, after that, Gulf.
Gulf
Yes.
students.
Larger
They
Gulf
do
students.
that even now.
They have a big picture of the mosque on their flyers to attract
Exactly.
students to the
Exactly.
Gulf region. But going back again, in the early community, you said, besides, you had the home space, and then there were some businesses, restaurants. Were there other social spaces where community got
And
together?
particularly for women. You talked about all the men used to come together.
We were such diverse Muslims. We were such open-minded Muslims. A lot of Muslim countries, they separate the men and women. We didn't. We never did. Especially my father and our family. We always empowered women. Because we all come from a woman. We were not hypocrites. Obviously we knew our place. Our women knew their places. Some of the religious ones, obviously, they would not touch another woman, shake her hand or something. Some of us were hijab, some of us didn't. Thank you. But we were such open-minded Muslim community. Let's put it that way. Actually, right now I see us going back, being more conservative as Muslims.
Yes.
Seriously.
Yes.
Because we want to be in your face. We want to show you who we are.
Right. So we put on the hijab. We do
Exactly.
all that.
We
Exactly.
segregate. We do this. We do that.
So we want to be more.
More there. We're here.
More Muslim.
We're here. We're like the Mormons. We're like the blacks. We're like the Catholics. We're like the the Protestant. Whatever.
Yeah. True.
Were there many with the restaurants? Were they sort of Middle Eastern restaurants, or were
Not
they
really.
No.
It was all American back then.
Yeah.
We started 16th Street and Thomas. We started the first Middle Eastern restaurant / bakery.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
16th.
And what is the name of this bakery restaurant?
Middle Eastern bakery it's called, yeah. And
16th
actually,
and Thomas.
this guy, he was Syrian, but he was a Syrian Christian. He came to my father and he said, what do you think, he was a good baker back home. My father said, why don't you, right now we have a lot of Muslims, we have a lot of Arabs, we have a lot of us. Why don't you start a Middle Eastern bakery / food? This guy was smart. You know, the Syrians are very smart business people.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know, Syria, one of the only Arab countries, used to be self-sufficient. You know?
Well, not to forget the Prophet himself used to go to say Hijaz
Yes,
for
ma'am.
business.
Yes, ma'am. Salah ad-Din came from there, you know?
So long.
So yeah, my father encouraged the Syrian Christian guy to do the to open that
Millicent
service.
Bakery was the first one.
Yes.
Does it still exist? No.
It still does. Actually, it's owned by a Palestinian now, I believe.
Okay.
Is
Yeah.
it the same name?
I think so. They're the ones who started Arabic bread. It's called Arabic bread, the original.
okay.
I love that stuff.
Yeah, the small ones, or, you know,
Yeah, the
not
small
pita.
ones.
And now they call it pita bread and all.
Yeah.
But back then he called it Arabic bread, and he became so popular. A lot of the big grocers started demanding that he sell to them. You know.
Okay.
One time we were gonna buy it, but you know, we were all doing. My brothers and I were all in different business, but
Right.
it's hard work.
It's hard work to produce that. I mean, you need
Yeah,
that.
so yeah, a lot of us actually were catering to, you know, Americans,
Right.
Yes.
you know.
Because that's what I was kind of curious. What was the interaction, so with non-Muslim American communities, and what were the places in which those interactions took place? Schools, obviously, is one, as children.
Schools,
Were there
parks,
social.
social places. We gathered at parks. My father tried at least, when the weather was nice, at least once a week. He'll call everybody. He said, okay, you don't want to do it at your house, let's go meet at South Mountain Park. So we'll go there for picnics. We would be going up and down the mountain, you know, back then. And he'll gather all of us there. We'll do either potluck or we barbecue there. We do prayers there, you know,
Yeah.
we meet, we brainstorm different things, and we talk amongst ourselves. Obviously, we also used to bring American friends with us, you know, because, you know, everybody had neighbors and they see you talking with accent like mine. Oh, where are you from, you know, blah, 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 you know. So, you know, way of life was nice here back then.
Was it as hot?
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean,
It's always that.
Because we keep hearing it's 10 degrees above normal. Was it as hot?
getting hotter.
But back then we used to get a lot of dust storms because the valley
Open
wasn't built
area.
up.
Right.
Right.
Wasn't built up. It was all farmland and desert. Right now they get it down south. The way going to Tucson, around Casa Grande area, because it's still wide open area. Yeah, so back then was nicer. It was nice, much drier heat than it is right now. You know,
Okay.
because
Much
of that,
drier.
much drier.
Because less trees.
Less trees, less
vegetation,
population,
vegetation.
less concrete.
Yes.
Yeah, less concrete. But and like I said, less freeways. I mean, I-17. I remember I-17 when they added the second lane, and there was nothing in the median, going up and down, Flagstaff and down. Then I-10, people used to go through here, Apache Trail, to go to Tucson through the prison, you know, through Florence, yes, you know. Grand Avenue used to take you to Nevada and California, because I-10 didn't exist. So if you want to go to Nevada or California, you got to take Grand Avenue, you know. Yeah.
But given all the changes, how do you think the Palestinian community here has fared? Have their economic situation become much better? Not to compare with back home, but with other communities, other groups here.
You know, a lot of hard work. Excuse me. See, back home, obviously, we all, as a result of the war, flew, whether refugees or just flew, just because we want to get out for a better life. But the hard work takes you to where you want to go. You know, I am proud of being an Arab, a Palestinian, and a Muslim, because we came here, you know, I myself, you know, worked for 90 cents an hour in the beginning when I came to this country. I worked for 7 months. I saved almost $300, bought my first car. You know, I worked at the Arizona Biltmore Hotel. There used to be 2 busboys to each waiter. And when you as a guest came, you took a sip of coffee. I ran and I gave you another. I filled your coffee up. So we learned back then to get ahead, you have to work hard, you have to work smart, and you have to mix with the general population. And being hard workers, not afraid to work, working 7 days, 10, 12 hours a day, it made us who we are. You know, and that's why we all became successful. Not because it was given to us, we worked for it, you know. I mean, I drove Cadillacs back 40 years ago, and Cadillac was like BMW and Mercedes now. Well, why? Because we were hard workers, you know. So we worked hard, we lived good because of the hard work, and we always contributed. I always employed people, paid taxes, you know. So is my brothers, you know, my father. And then my father got ill. We told him, sit down, relax. We take care of the family. And also my other family and friends. We were never afraid of hard work. You know, we did not just settle for a job, you know, because a job you're going to earn a yearly wage. And obviously back then a lot of us couldn't afford, my father couldn't afford to send us to be a doctor. I wanted to be an engineer, you know, and I majored in engineering and also psychology, you know. But I found a niche to make it in the business world, and I said, you know, no more school, you know, I gotta keep going with business, and that's when I quit school, you know, and proceeded after a business opportunity. So you go from one opportunity to other, but hard work is what, for us Palestinians here, that's how we made it. It's hard work, and you know. Like I said, you want to live good, you want to have kids, you want to have a family, you want to drive a nice car, you want to live in a good house. So you have to work hard. You cannot just work on somebody giving you an hourly wage, you know.
Do you see that shift, say, in newer Palestinian families who've come since then? Who've come since then, you know, particularly say in the 80s or 90s, do they have different mindset, or do you find them molding into the community in the same way?
You know, a lot of them did mold in the community, and also they learned from us, the elders, to go in business. Some took education, you know. Yes, a lot of them went. We encourage education, you know, because the old guard, we made it in business because of our mindset. Right. You know, and we kept telling them, okay, don't look at me, I'm in business, I'm making it, but you know, maybe you want to get the education. Right. So we encourage the youngsters to get the education. I had 2 daughters, and I said, get your education. I'm gonna leave you with nothing. Abuse me now. Go to school, seriously. And I said, in case you get married and a man is a failure, you have to go make it on your own. Seriously, I said, get your education. And lucky for me, and also our family and friends, we educated our kids highly, you know. And my youngest daughter... Did they
go to ASU?
The oldest daughter went to ASU, and she had a full ride. She works with UBS. She's in the financial business. Her and her team, they manage $1 billion in portfolios. My youngest wanted to be a heart surgeon. I sent her to a medical school, but she stopped. She became a perfusionist. She... you know, when you do a heart surgery, you have the triangle. You have the surgeon, the anesthesiologist, and her. Okay. She basically killed you. Basically took you out of, you know, and then she kept your organs running.
Intubation.
And she brought you back.
Okay.
Wow. She has the hardest job out of the 3. Exactly. The anesthesiologist gives you the medicine, he sits and goes to sleep. The surgeon does his sewings. She had to make sure your livers are working, your blood is circulating outside your body. I mean, it's crazy.
So she's a medical doctor.
She stopped and she became a perfusionist. But her ultimate dream is to become a heart surgeon. But she couldn't get married, have a life, blah, blah, blah. She had to go to do more schooling. I said, whatever you want. Right now, there's only 4,100 of them, and I'm proud of her. She can go to any city in the United States, any state. She gets like job offers every day in the mail, you know. So yeah, she's done well. She stopped, you know. She stopped right there, you know. So yeah.
So your 2 daughters settled everything good. Another quick question. We'll have another meeting in 5-10 minutes.
No problem.
Excuse me. where do the Palestinian community now see themselves going after what has happened?
You know, this year took a lot of toll on us, you know, and ever since this genocide took place, I've been doing press conferences with my Palestinian brothers and also our allies. We have allies, and we have the Muslim community which came to our rescue, which includes the Pakistani, the Afghanis, the Bangladeshis, the Albanians, Muslims of all backgrounds, Latinos, blacks, different organizations that came to our rescues. So, I mean, this week I have 3 events to do, you know. So we've been lobbying elected officials, we've been knocking on doors to congressmen and women, knocking on doors to senators, working the phones, trying to elect the right people in office, canvassing for good candidates, knocking on doors, doing fundraisers for the good people that come to our rescue. I've been working with the progressive Democrats, to be honest with you, and the Democrats, some of the Democrats, because they're our allies. You know, as if you noticed, you know, 100 of them called for ceasefire, 0 from the Republicans. So, yeah, so we united as Palestinians, Muslims, Arabs, and allies to fight this genocide and to try to bring it to a stop, because this genocide is being committed in our name. We are all complicit. Our tax money, you pay taxes, I do, you do, you know. And Mr. Biden is sending bombs, you know. I mean, he's sending our people to fight too, to fight my people.
An American soldier just died.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But how do you feel then about the outcome of the election?
You know, it's a bad outcome either side. Because we were hoping Kamala would come out and be her own woman.
Yeah, and she just followed Joe Biden.
Yeah, and get away from underneath his umbrella. You know, her argument is they sent us 2 surrogates. By the way, she could not meet with us because we demanded a meeting with her last time. So they sent us Senator Coons of Delaware because he's a close confidant with Biden. And I gathered Muslims, all countries, and we had a huge lunch for him, about 75 of us, and we made the case, you know, and we sent a message. After that, they sent us Keith Ellison. He's the first black congressman.
Yeah, first Muslim congressman.
From Minnesota. I brought him here, 2 weeks ago or so. We actually hosted him at one of my friends, Dr. Naveed. He's a Pakistani Muslim. I don't know if you heard of him. He lives in the east side. We had a big gathering at his house, about 200 of us. Again, Muslims, allies of all walks of life, and we hosted Keith Ellison there. Because we were just sickened of Biden and his administration, how complicit they are. And we knew all along. I mean, 24 hours later, Biden went to Israel and he said, "I'm a Zionist."
Yes.
So we knew there was no hope from him.
Yeah.
You know. And, you know, they keep saying, oh, okay, well, you know, we say she's part of the administration. Oh, but she doesn't make the decisions. But that's BS.
Yeah.
Excuse my language. She's part of the administration. She had some to say. You know, she's the VP. You know, if the man passed away, she would have been the president. So this election, I've been here 53 years. I went through all the elections, but this is the hardest one. You know, because it's, you know, lose. And if we don't vote, obviously you lose again as Muslims. And if you vote third party is BS, again, excuse my language. Yeah. Because America is a 2-party system, either Democrats or Republicans. Like last night, it's either Kamala or Trump. And Trump won. Yeah. You know, Jill Stein came here. I refused to even sit with her. Where were you 3 years ago? How come
that's what I'm saying.
You stepped up 4 years ago, but you died. And now all of a sudden you want the Muslim vote, the Arab vote, and the Palestinian vote. You know, actually, you know, a good friend of mine hosted that. I said, no, man, I come to your house anytime. I love you. But I don't want to come and sit. And
a lot of people my age are so for Green Party, Jill Stein. And they're like, I just don't.
Nonsense.
She's gonna disappear, you know.
She's gone. She's already gone.
Yeah.
She only got 9,000 votes.
I think she reached 4% of the votes. I'm not
Four?
sure.
No, 0.4%.
Zero.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
what I
I'm sorry.
thought. Yeah.
0.4.
She needed 5%.
5%.
She got 0.4.
0.4.
Yeah. She just seems like another political charlatan. to me.
Exactly. But see, to me right now, I mean, it's unfortunate it took this genocide for us Muslims/Palestinians to wake up. And I think right now, you know, what I've seen this year, there's an awakening in the young American people.
Yeah.
Of all different nationalities, different beliefs.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think those people, the next 4 years, they're gonna be a big factor.
But from your perspective, what is it going to take now for Muslims to have the impact?
To have the impact, we need to be united nationally. I belong to Impact Muslim Public Affairs, you know.
Yeah.
And we need, you know, we need to change the policies toward Islam and Muslims. You know, we need to be in their faces. We need to lobby them. We need to be not afraid. You know, that's how the blacks got their civil rights
Yep.
in the 60s.
But
you know?
while that's a very interesting thing that you said that the comparison with blacks, the civil rights, it was for people here, blacks. They never said, "Oh, we want rights, and our policies are for Somalia, Sudan, whatever is happening elsewhere." If Muslims keep doing foreign policy as the reason to question the administration here, how will we get ahead here in America?
No, my fight is here, is to change the narrative and the policies of Islam in this country. And that would change the foreign outlook. If we do it here, start in America, you know. Right now, we have no, like when something happens against Islam, we have no spokesperson to stand up and say, hey, it speaks on our behalf. And this is what I want as a Muslim.
But do you think that is because Muslims are so diverse? They are from so many different ethnicities and nationalities compared to other communities who are from one or two countries.
It's true, because we are from different countries. But you know, Islam should unite us as Muslims from different backgrounds. You know, it does unite us a lot in the mosques, but that's not good enough for me. You know, I can go and open the Quran and read. I don't need to sit and listen to an imam tell me how to wash my hands and how to enter the mosque and all that stuff. You know, we need to go beyond that. You know, we need to go beyond that. But we need to change the narratives of Muslims and Islams here. You know, I'm gonna take you to another subject. Remember last year when we had the encampment here? Okay, when they removed the hijabs, right?
Yeah.
Okay. After 9/11, we started what we called Arizona Muslim Police Advisory Board. A friend of mine and I and a bunch of us.
You were part of that?
I'm a board member there.
Okay.
You know what we did when we heard that? We lobbied. We started with the sheriff's office. We had like, I don't know, 7-8 meetings since then until about a month ago. We had them implement a hijabi policy. I picked the material of the hijab. I picked the colors, my friends and I. And we started with the sheriff's department. We had them reach out to other states where were more Muslims. And I brought, you know, I would call on this imam, that imam, every time we had a meeting, because I am not a scholar on Islam myself, to give guidance to the sheriff office. So now this hijabi policy is going to be implemented by all PDs in Phoenix and all the surrounding cities. And as an Arizona Muslim Police Advisory Board, we meet different PDs every couple of 3 months. I know some of you youngsters, you hate the cops. You know, I know that for a fact, and I get a lot of pushback. But when I tell them what I do, they back off. I'm not cooperating with the police. I'm not being a snitch. I'm not anti-police. I'm not pro-police. But I'm there for a reason, because of Islam and Muslims. You know, because I get a lot of pushback. Because right now, and I would like to invite you, on the 23rd, we have our annual gala.
What time is that at?
23rd is, you should go.
Yeah, I can try to go, yeah.
Yeah, I'll
Because
send you
we
the
have
information.
another program going on on the 23rd of November for students for professional development.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's too bad we could have
We
had
would
you
love to
there.
come. But
So what
let
we
us
do.
know for future.
So we bring in the FBI, we bring in the sheriffs, the DPS, PDs from all the cities, and now we call it an appreciation dinner. I had so much flack about that. You traitor, you! I said, no, hold on. I'm not appreciating the cops for killing innocent people. I'm appreciating the sheriff department for working for me on your behalf, so our sisters can wear their hijabis and be respected when they get pulled over, when they get searched, if they go to jail. Obviously, alhamdulillah, our people don't drink, don't do drugs, stuff like that, so we don't have a lot of Muslim problems, So, yeah, on the chats, they were, and I said, listen, here's my name, here's my number, let's talk. I'm old-fashioned. I like to talk on the phone. Let me tell you what I'm doing with the police, I'm not being a snitch,
So
Do
you
you
should
find
go
the
for
police
that.
departments
Yeah, that's
generally receptive? Or?
Very receptive to what we do.
I just want
Oh,
to
go ahead. Because we make them, we demand. Unlike last meeting, we had it at the Scottsdale PD. We demand every 2-3 months, and we also take them, and we took them last time to the Albanian Mosque in North Phoenix. We brought them here to Tempe. We took them to the Scottsdale Mosque, So this is how we can be a force to be reckoned with.
Right.
That's how we can have a sense of belonging, by telling these CDs, we are Muslims, we are proud Muslims. You need to listen to us. You need to behave when you come to an Islamic home, or one of the cops asked me one time, what's the big deal about the hijab? I said, okay, I knock on your door and you open the door for me. You have your wife naked in the back of your door. Would you let me in? He said, no. I said, that's how our sisters believe. When there's no hijab, she believes she's naked. Would you want me, a stranger, to see your wife naked? He said, no. I said, that's how it is. Opened his eyes,
But similar kind of work we found has been happening in Sweden, in Gothenburg, where there are very old Muslim communities, mostly Turkish.
Yes.
And there's a lot of academics who are anthropologists who work with Muslim communities, who have been advising the police how to
Give us about 10
yeah.
minutes. Tell Mark.
I'm sorry, I'm
No,
taking too much
I
of your
cannot
time.
do too much. I have another meeting, so I have to have lunch and then do my 2:00 meeting. So I don't think we can extend. So that kind of police
I
advisory.
can come back, seriously.
Yes,
Yeah, we would love
police
that was
advisory
great.
work has been going on. But in Sweden, they have been telling us that besides the police not having the cultural awareness of the meaning of Muslim attire and things like that, Muslims themselves are also involved in a lot of particularly drug business. Do you find those, although you're saying our Muslim brothers are not involved in alcohol and drugs, can we honestly say that they're not involved?
You know what? We can't say 100%.
Okay.
I can tell you 90% of the Muslim communities are 100% perfect.
It's here.
Seriously. Everybody I know, family, friends, and community members, I know there's, some of them, they go and they veer with the different crowd, and they start doing that other bad stuff. So we are not 100% perfect. No, of course not. But I can tell you we are 90%.
Good.
For a fact.
And I'm recording this because we need to come to it from multiple directions, not that we're trying to interrogate or anything, but just to understand the community's challenges, the contributions, the opportunities.
And how people also see the community.
Yes.
Right? And that becomes sort of important. As you said, when you don't have Muslims always in jail, coming to cycling gangs, a lot of immigrant communities, there's a lot of gangs. Right?
Yeah, I tell these cops, you know what? If you want to go buy a house, go see if there's any Muslim neighbors and buy a house next to them, because they will take care of you. I mean, 90% of the time they will.
Right.
I'm not saying we're an exception, but we are.
Right.
Because we live holy. We do all the right thing that Allah tells us to do. And that's how we live our life. even in this country. But yes, some of us are, some of us elders or even our kids, they veer and they go, they go the wrong way and they start doing drugs or alcohol or do this or the other, and that's when we get the calls,
Yes.
Because just to come back and just since we sort of have to wrap up a little, as a center, we have multiple sort of things. We sort of see ourselves as a research center.
Yeah, tell me about the center, please.
Academic center, as part of the university, to do research and documenting, in a sense, and sharing the voice, in a sense, and perspective and the contributions of Muslims and the rich histories, etc., and the cultures, and just our diversity, right? But really our contributions to the United States. But there are multiple facets of that sort of research, but also it's getting that message out, right? Who we are.
Sure.
As Muslim, and I'm a Muslim. I'm a convert myself. So,
yes, sir.
And who we are as Muslims, and to sort of accept us as we are, and so doing a lot of community sort of trying to do some community outreach and that education, either virtually, through social media or through sort of various virtual sort of things. Jamil's working on a kind of a timeline of Muslim Americans to get out there, other things. Another is strengthening Muslim students at ASU.
100%, yes.
And their sort of sense of belonging and stuff. So this thing on the 23rd, we're doing a kind of a professional development workshop for engineering students and bringing a lot of people who work at Intel and other places to help them get internships, etc., kind of thing. So, but one of the areas we haven't really got into is like some of this, like police forces, teachers, other things that, in a sense, also have to learn about Muslims because they're the ones who are interacting or teaching students and others. So what are they teaching in their classes? How do they deal with Muslim students during Ramadan?
Exactly.
Things like that. So that's another area that we haven't really developed yet. But one of the things, down the road, it'd be quite interesting for us to potentially meet, say, with this board for the Arizona Police.
Beautiful. Next time we have a meeting at one of the PDs, I will invite you. You can come and see what we do.
Yes.
It would be, we do it like at different PDs every couple of 3 months.
Because you guys are doing the groundwork.
We've been doing the groundwork. We started that because of 9/11. And like I said, we had to do what we had to do. We started here. I don't know if other states have it, but we took it up on ourselves to do this because we want to show the law enforcement agencies we are not all bad Muslims.
We're just wrapping up.
That's
okay.
Can
you just do 2
Yeah. But we're going to come back here.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll come back.
Sorry.